It often starts with something simple, right? A question at a neighborhood meeting. But what happens when that simple question spirals into emails, then accusations, and then, boom, a formal legal petition? Today, we're jumping into a case where one homeowner's request for a single document from her HOA turned into a full-blown, year-long court battle.
And really, this whole thing boils down to one fascinating question, one that could affect literally anyone living in an HOA community. It's a story about transparency, responsibility, and that super fine line between a resident's right to know and an organization's right to privacy.
All right, so let's set the scene. Our story kicks off at what you'd think is a totally normal, run-of-the-mill Homeowners Association board meeting. I mean, nobody in that room had any idea that this meeting would be the spark that lit a huge legal fire. So picture this. It's November 20th, 2018. The board is hashing out a problem that's been dragging on for a while, an eroding retaining wall, and the big question, who's going to pay for it? In the middle of this discussion, the HOA president mentions they've gotten a letter from their attorney about it. You know, a letter that spells out the HOA's legal duties.
And this is where things get interesting. We have a direct quote from the HOA president. Right there, in an open meeting, he says this. It really sounds like he's giving the green light for residents to see the lawyer's opinion. I mean, it seems like a pretty straightforward offer of transparency, right?
Now, there's someone in the room listening very closely. Her name is Joan Tober. And it's important to know she's not just any resident. She's a former board member, and she even served on the finance committee. So she knows the ropes. She's really familiar with how the HOA works, and especially the money side of things.
So a few days go by, and she shoots off this email. Super simple, totally polite. She just references what the president said at the meeting and asks for a copy. At this point, you'd think, okay, no big deal. A simple request to follow up on a public offer. What could go wrong?
Well, as it turns out, it was a big deal. What started as the simple little request pretty quickly morphed into a standoff. And the timeline here, wow, it is surprisingly fast.
I mean, just look at how quickly this whole thing unraveled. November 20th, the verbal offer. By the 27th, after she's already sent a second email, the HOA suddenly hits the brakes. They need to get clarification from their lawyer. Just 2 days after that, Tober comes back with a much wider request for documents, and by December 26th, get this, just 1 month after that first friendly email, she's filed a formal legal petition with the state. From neighborly request to legal action in 30 days flat.
Okay, so when this whole thing finally lands in front of a judge, Joan Tober comes prepared. She has a really clear legal argument for why she thinks she was entitled to see that letter and a bunch of other documents. Let's break down her side of the story.
Her case really boils down to 3 key things. First, and this is the big one, she argued that the second the HOA president started talking about that letter in an open meeting, they gave up what's called attorney-client privilege. Basically, the cat was out of the bag. Second, she pointed to state law, which says homeowners have a right to see HOA records within 10 days. And third, she reasoned that since this whole wall issue went way back, there had to be a ton of other documents, which she called background information that the HOA was hiding from her.
But as you can probably guess, the HOA had a completely different take on this. Their entire defense was built around one of the most basic principles in the entire legal system. So let's look at their side of the argument.
And that principle is attorney-client privilege. This is a huge deal in law. It's the rule that lets any person or any group, including an HOA, get private legal advice from their lawyer without being forced to share it with the rest of the world. It's all about making sure people can get honest legal help.
So the HOA's defense was pretty cut and dry. First, they argued that the letter was protected legal advice, plain and simple. Second, and this is so important, they said that just mentioning a letter in a meeting is not the same thing as giving up the right to keep it private. And then they had a third point, which was aimed right at how Tober's request changed over time, saying her final demand was just way too vague for them to even act on. And this, right here, this is the turning point. This is the exact wording from Tober's third email. You can see the shift, right? She goes from asking for the letter to demanding any and all documentation and all background information. That specific wording, it would end up being a massive focus in the final legal decision.
You know, the judge zoomed right in on that phrase, any and all background information, and flat out called it unreasonably broad. And that was a huge blow to Tober's case because it kind of flipped the script. The HOA basically said, look, how can we give you what you want if we don't even know what you're asking for?
So, there you have it. 2 totally different arguments clashing head-to-head. You've got the homeowner's right to information on one side and the HOA's right to private legal advice on the other.
After a whole year of this, how did the judge finally sort it all out? Let's walk through that final verdict.
The judge's ruling was really broken down step by step. First, the law was crystal clear. That attorney's letter was privileged. The HOA didn't have to hand it over, and that verbal comment at the meeting didn't change a thing. Second, the judge totally agreed that the any and all request was just too vague. Third, the homeowner had a chance to fix this. The HOA actually asked for clarification. They even asked if she wanted some old engineering reports, but she never gave them a clear yes or no. And that leads to the final critical point. The judge said an HOA is not required to be a mind reader. The burden is on the person asking to be specific.
So can you believe it? After a whole year, a fight that all started with a casual comment at a meeting, the final ruling lands squarely in favor of the Homeowners Association. The judge found they had followed the law. Case dismissed. This entire case really leaves us with some powerful lessons for anyone living in an HOA. First, a casual offer made in a public meeting doesn't magically erase attorney-client privilege. And second, and this might be the most important takeaway of all, when you're asking for documents, specificity is everything. A vague request for any and all documents can be legally shot down. All of this really leaves us with a tough question to think about, doesn't it? When it comes to our own communities, who holds the greater responsibility? Is it on the board to be as transparent as humanly possible, or is it on the homeowner to craft requests so precisely that there's absolutely no room for misunderstanding? It's a tricky balance that every single community has to figure out.